Hey guys, tonight we're going for a slow, squelching walk through a medieval marketplace. It's just before dawn, and the first hints of light are smearing the sky a soft, murky gray. Not quite golden hour, more like pewter hour. The kind of light that makes everything look either vaguely sacred or like it needs a good scrub. You're standing outside the town gate, staring at the old iron portcullis and a wooden sign that creaks like it's got opinions. Behind you, a rooster gives its best performance and fails to impress the sleepy donkey tied to a post. That donkey has seen some things. A few others are arriving with you. Traders from nearby villages, their carts jostling on uneven stones, baskets wrapped in linen, and bundled herbs dangling like upside-down witches' brooms. You can smell the sour-sweet hint of old cider before you even spot the barrel merchant unloading his stock. It's too early for customers, but already the rhythm of setup has begun. The market's not officially open, but the ritual of unfolding, untying, and muttering to yourself while kicking a stubborn crate, that part's sacred. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the half-awake town square. No crowd yet, just the scattered murmurs of preparation. You pass a fishmonger dabbing his nose with a rag that's doing no one any favors. He's just started arranging eels in rows like slippery, resentful soldiers. A woman in a red coif is spreading straw to soak up what you hope is water, but it probably isn't. The cobblestones are permanently damp in this part of town. It's like the road sweats point one stall over. Two apprentices are unlocking a wooden chest the size of a mid-sized dog. It creaks open with the drama of a tomb, revealing bolts of cloth neatly packed like precious relics. The younger apprentice sneezes into his elbow and mutters something about the spirits of the silk moths. Fringe belief or sleep deprivation? Hard to tell. As the sun makes a sluggish appearance, the tone shifts. A brazier crackles to life near the bread cart, sending out tendrils of warm, yeasty scent. A woman ladles hot porridge into clay bowls for her children, who are watching a chicken with a look that suggests they might be plotting something. You suspect that chicken won't make it to supper. Now a bell rings from the nearby priory tower. Not the grand, echoing toll of church hours, but a tinny little clang that means the vendors need to finish setting up or lose their spots. That bell, by the way, was once stolen by a neighboring village during a local feud and had to be ransomed back with 4 barrels of ale and a goose. Historians still argue whether the goose was decorative or part of the payment. You pause under a makeshift awning, watching a man in a felt hat attempt to prop up a collapsing display of dried figs using only one hand and a deeply defeated sigh. His cart bears the proud family crest of 2 crossed turnips, which is either clever branding or a warning. A woman walks by carrying 3 wicker baskets stacked taller than her head, balancing them with the grace of someone who doesn't have time for physics. She nods at you politely before vanishing into the crowd forming near the gate, where 2 knights in dented armor pretend not to be checking their own reflections in the polished breastplates. You catch sight of the marketplace scribe. He's not famous, but he's important. His job is to document prices, disputes, and the occasional spontaneous poetry competition. He walks with a small wooden stool strapped to his back and a pouch full of quills that make him rattle when he moves. Legend has it he once won an argument by quoting 3 legal scrolls and a bawdy ballad, all in the same sentence. Near the old fountain, which has not had actual water since the sheep uprising of '83, you see a young boy chasing pigeons with a stick that's technically a defense wand, according to his older sister. His laughter breaks the stillness for a moment, and then the pigeons retaliate with the sort of wing-flapping vengeance usually reserved for Greek myths. Just then, a small group of friars walks by, sandals slapping softly on stone. They murmur blessings as they go, but you catch one sneaking a glance at a meat pie stall with what can only be described as longing. The pie vendor winks as if to say, "We both know how this ends." The vendors have almost finished setting up now. Banners are unfurling in the slow breeze, stripes of saffron and indigo, ochre and faded turquoise. Someone lights incense near a spice booth, and the air shifts from muddy to exotic in a single breath. You move past a merchant laying out knives with terrifying precision, each blade catching the morning sun like it's auditioning for a play about vengeance. You pause again as a cart trundles past, pulled by two goats and a wheel that's very much not interested in staying round. The driver hums a tune that's older than the street itself, something about lost lovers and jam that never sets. And that's when you realize the gates are fully open now. The crowd begins to pour in. Townfolk with baskets, villagers with chickens under their arms, travelers hoping this town has better beer than the last. The rhythm of the market has begun, and you're right in the thick of it. But don't worry, you won't need a shopping list. You just need your eyes, your ears, and maybe a bit of imagination. Because from here on out, we're not just shopping, we're wandering through the pages of living history. You drift toward the food stalls, following your nose like some half-awake medieval bloodhound. The air here is thick with competing scents. Wood smoke, yeast, roasted onions, and a suspiciously persistent undertone of fish. You can't tell where one vendor ends and the next begins, because every available space is packed. Tables made from doors, crates balanced on overturned buckets, barrels acting as impromptu counters. There's a woman stirring something in a large blackened cauldron that smells savory, spicy, and maybe a little bit like socks. She offers you a sample on the tip of a wooden spoon. It's barley stew, simple, hearty, and best enjoyed with your expectations firmly lowered. It's not bad, though. She winks as she ladles out another portion for a man who trades her a small spool of dyed thread. Coins are optional here. Barter is still the unofficial language of the market. Over by the grain cellar, a well-fed pigeon waddles confidently between sacks of millet and rye. It's clearly irregular. The merchant doesn't even flinch when it hops onto a scale like it's about to pay rent. Behind him, a chalkboard lists prices that have been crossed out and rewritten so many times, you'd think economics was a form of performance art. You pause at a table selling honeycomb, each wedge dripping golden syrup onto fig leaves. The vendor, a surprisingly jolly man missing exactly half his teeth, tells you his bees are very devout and only collect from monastery gardens. You're not entirely sure what that means, but he's already wrapping up a sample in wax linen and handing it to you like a proud parent. Right next door is a stall dedicated to medieval fast food. Meat pies, spiced nuts, tiny cheese rounds, and pastries filled with things you hope are apples. One of the pies is labeled Friday Safe, which means it's probably made from fish or mushrooms, or, if the cook's feeling cheeky, eels pretending to be lamb. You take a bite and decide not to ask. Nearby, a pair of elderly women are embroiled in an argument over who makes better pickled turnips. It's the kind of debate that's lasted longer than most noble dynasties. One of them gestures wildly with a ladle, accidentally flinging a small, pinkish slice into your direction. You catch it on instinct, the surprisingly tangy. You nod appreciatively, which only intensifies the rivalry. You may have just started a condiment war. A brewer is tapping a keg at the end of the lane, froth spilling over like a foamy waterfall. This isn't modern beer. It's murky, unfiltered stuff that tastes somewhere between bread and ambition. You sip it out of a wooden cup and immediately feel warmer, as though someone just draped a wool cloak over your shoulders. It's comfort disguised as alcohol. He's offering it with a side of soft, smoked cheese rolled in herbs. Pairs well with regret, he says, deadpan. You like this guy. Further along, a woman sells candied nuts from a hot iron pan, stirring with a stick that looks like it was originally part of a fence. She offers you a sample, warm, crunchy, and dusted with cinnamon. A boy beside you whispers that she uses secret magic to keep the sugar from burning. Historians still argue whether recipes in this period were more chemistry or folklore. The line was blurry, especially when alchemists started trying to turn lead into pudding. At the far corner, you find the spice merchant. He's not yelling like the others. Instead, he speaks quietly, letting the smells do the work. Dried ginger, anise, cinnamon bark, crushed rose petals. He has trays full of color, saffron yellow, pepper black, paprika red, and scoops each out with tiny bone-handled spoons. Some of these spices came from far-off lands you've only seen on old maps or badly drawn tapestries. He shows you a lump of myrrh and tells you it was once mistaken for dragon droppings by a very confused monk. This may or may not be true, but you want to believe it. You duck under a linen awning as a drizzle begins to fall. Just a light patter, enough to make the air smell earthy and the bread crusts a bit more dramatic. Raindrops thump softly on tent cloth while vendors shout over one another about whose onions are less weepy. You bite into a roasted chestnut and suddenly understand why people wrote poetry about snacks. Not good poetry, but still. Right as you're wiping your hands on your tunic hem, don't worry, everyone's doing it. A man comes racing past with a bundle of leeks under one arm and a live chicken under the other. The chicken is unimpressed. You step aside, just in time to avoid getting smacked by its wing. A nearby child giggles like this is the best thing that's happened all week. In the lull after the little rain. Steam rises from every warm dish and mug. It gives the food lane a foggy, enchanted look, like a potion brewing in the world's hungriest cauldron. You sip another cup of barley beer, sit down on a low stone wall and just watch. Vendors joking with each other, families comparing carrots like they're priceless gems, strangers bumping elbows over a shared love of pickled eggs. This isn't just about buying dinner. This is about knowing who sells the apples that don't bruise, who cures ham with rosemary instead of salt, who gives extra scraps to the dogs that wait patiently beneath the bread stalls. These aren't fast transactions. They're little performances. Each sale a conversation, each booth a character, and every bite a small victory against the boredom of daily bread. You lean back, stomach pleasantly full, eyelids a little heavy. A dog trots by carrying half a baguette like it's won a contest. Somewhere, a bell rings again. Not urgent, just a nudge. The next part of the market is calling. Tools, trades, maybe even medicine if you're brave enough. But for now, you just sit. Let your legs rest. Let your senses soak in this delicious patchwork of smell, sound, and warmth. Because this is a marketplace where every breadcrumb has a backstory. You eventually stand again, brushing a few crumbs from your tunic and rubbing the last of the honey from your fingertips. The air still carries traces of cinnamon and roasting leeks, but now it mingles with sharper, more metallic hints, burnished tools, hammered nails, and something vaguely smoky. You're entering the tradesman's quarter of the marketplace now, where the clang of iron replaces the calls of carrot vendors, and everyone seems slightly sootier than they were 5 steps ago. First, there's the blacksmith's canopy, which is less of a stall and more of a performance arena. He's bare-armed despite the weather, sweat beading on his temples, and he swings his hammer with a rhythm that feels older than the town itself. The metal on the anvil glows orange before cooling into something sharp and functional. A horseshoe, a belt buckle, a blade for a scythe. Occasionally, sparks leap upward like fireflies having an argument. You stand just outside the splash zone, mesmerized. The smith's apprentice, 12, maybe 13, bellows a greeting at you, then goes back to furiously operating the bellows, looking like he's auditioning for a medieval gym membership. They're reforging a plowshare today, which, as it turns out, involves more finesse than brute force. Historians still argue whether smithing was considered pure craftsmanship or a near-mystical rite. Either way, you wouldn't trust yourself to replicate it with even a 5-minute tutorial and a strong prayer. Next door is the cooper, seated cross-legged beside a disassembled barrel. He's tapping staves into place with a mallet that looks like it's seen at least 3 generations of use. The scent here is oak and pitch, a mix that sticks to the back of your throat. He eyes you as you approach, then nods toward a finished cask. "This one's for vinegar," he says, "but it'll probably end up full of eels." You nod sagely, because somehow that makes perfect sense. A few steps away, the potter spins a kick wheel, shaping soft clay into a jug while humming something that sounds suspiciously like a drinking song. The pots are not symmetrical, not even close, but they have charm, the kind of wobble that suggests a real human made them, probably while distracted by gossip or goats. One of them has a little face molded into the handle. The potter tells you it's based on her neighbor, who complains too much about chimney smoke. It's oddly flattering. You pause at the carpenter's stall, where a long bench is covered in shavings that look like curled onion skins. He's carving a cradle, smoothing the edges with a bit of sharkskin. "Better than sandpaper," he explains, holding up the rough material like it's a medieval flex tape. You run your hand over the wood. It's soft, warm, and smells faintly of sap and toasted bread. Next to him is a wheelwright, who, despite his very specific title, is also repairing a wooden chest, a hay rake, and what might once have been part of a musical instrument. You ask if that's in his job description. He shrugs. If it's round or made of wood, I get paid either way. He's got a beard like a feather duster and a sense of humor to match. You like him immediately. A little further on, tucked between the toolmakers, is a modest tent strung with delicate items. Bone needles, horn combs, carved buttons, and wooden pins. The woman behind the stall gives you a lopsided smile and gestures to a small loom propped against the side. Husband's work, she says. Mine is the embroidery. You pick up a bit of cloth with a stitched duck in a knight's helmet. Based on a dream, she adds, as if that clarifies everything. Honestly, it kind of does. There's a distinct clatter nearby, the sound of chisels on stone. The mason's booth has a pile of limestone offcuts stacked like bread loaves, each marked with faint chisel patterns. One block has a sleepy-looking gargoyle peeking out from the corner. Test piece, the mason grunts. Too friendly. You run your fingers over the half-smooth surface. Cold, chalky, and somehow comforting, like a ghost that's really into nap culture. The tanner's area is harder to love. The smell arrives before you do. A pungent mix of hides, lime, urine, and centuries of perseverance. You do a polite pass-by while pretending to sneeze, which earns you a sympathetic nod from a child holding his nose and a scrap of goatskin. The tanner doesn't even blink. You'll get used to it, he says. You're not convinced. You pass a broom maker methodically bundling birch twigs, each lash tied with coarse twine. Which free guarantee, he jokes. You ask if that's extra. No, but flying lessons are. He winks. His stall smells clean and woodsy, like the forest was kind enough to organize itself. You stop at a tiny forge with delicate tools. Metal tweezers, awls, engraving picks, and jewelry molds. The artisan here makes pins and buckles with floral details so fine they look painted on. She's squinting through a magnifying lens the size of a walnut, barely nodding at your greeting. A tray beside her holds tiny rings, some etched with runes or odd symbols. Sleep charms, she mutters. Might work, probably won't. Historians still argue whether these were genuine protective amulets or just medieval mood rings with better marketing. Finally, you find the brushmaker. His setup is small, just bundles of bristle, handles carved from ashwood, and a series of finished brushes ranging from huge hearth sweepers to fine little cosmetic ones. This one's goat hair, he tells you, stroking it like it's a beloved pet. Soft as a bishop's bedtime. You take his word for it. You linger here, listening to the clatter, scrape, and tap of work continuing all around you. There's something deeply calming about these repetitive tasks. Each hammer blow, each pass of a plane, each swirl of clay spun by a steady hand. These people aren't rushing. They aren't shouting. They're just making things. Quietly, patiently, skillfully, you start to understand how a market like this breathes, not just through trade, but through rhythm, through tools and textures, through splinters and soot. You watch a blacksmith nod once at the potter, who waves a handleless mug in return. It's not just commerce, it's community. A slow dance of daily needs and quiet pride. A breeze picks up, tugging gently at the linen tent flaps. You close your eyes for just a moment, letting the heat of forge and the scent of freshly carved wood wash over you. And just like that, the market draws you deeper in. As you drift onward, the clatter of hammers and the whir of potters' wheels start to fade, replaced by a different sort of rhythm, voices, laughter, occasional bursts of song. You've arrived at the section of the marketplace devoted to textiles and fashion, though that word carries a different weight here. It's less about trends and more about how not to freeze, itch, or offend a bishop with too much ankle. You find yourself before a sprawling display of bolts and rolls. Wool, linen, hemp, and something scratchy labeled only as goat spun. The merchant, a woman with a spindle tucked behind one ear and a thumb ring that says she's not afraid to outbargain you, greets you with a nod. She's unrolling a length of fabric dyed in uneven bands of blue. Madder root didn't take properly, she explains. Looks accidental, but the noble women'll eat it up. You run a hand along the cloth. It feels like summer heat and rough hospitality. You spot a group of weavers nearby, their looms creaking like slow-moving ships. One of them hums a tune as she threads the shuttle back and forth. Her rhythm so steady it feels like it might outlive the century. The patterns are simple: checks, stripes, blocks, but each carries the fingerprint of its maker. You ask how long a tunic takes. Depends who's asking. One of them says, raising an eyebrow. You? Maybe 2 weeks and a miracle. Nearby, 2 tailors argue in front of a mannequin shaped like a barrel with arms. One insists that square necklines are coming back into favor. The other scoffs. Only among those who don't sweat like pigs. A passerby chimes in. Better than those laced sleeves. Took me an hour to pee. They all laugh. You do too, quietly hoping medieval zippers were never a thing. Spoiler, they weren't. A young boy waves at you from behind a rack of second-hand cloaks. These ones are haunted, he says brightly. You raise a skeptical brow. One hummed at me, he adds, more serious now. His older sister rolls her eyes but doesn't disagree. You decide not to buy a cloak, but you do give the ghost rack a respectful nod as you pass. You pause at a dye seller's stall, where bowls of powdered colors sit like piles of enchanted dust. There's ochre yellow, madder red, woad blue, and something purplish labeled, no refunds. The merchant has stained fingers and a grin that makes you nervous. Woad stinks, she says conversationally. Smells like boiled feet, but it lasts forever. Historians still argue whether ancient dyers truly believed some pigments had protective qualities or just told customers that to sell more socks. Someone rushes by carrying a basket of spindles, nearly tripping over a spool of unspun flax. You help gather it up and get a distracted thanks as they vanish into a nearby tent labeled Spinster's Guild. You peer inside. The air hums with the buzz of conversation and the soft whir of drop spindles. One woman glares at her yarn like it personally betrayed her. Another is singing softly to hers. You're not sure who's winning. You step out and find a hatter's table. The display is chaotic. Caps, cowls, hoods, and a strange leather thing that looks like a defeated bird. That's for traveling monks, the hatter explains. Keeps the rain off and the devil out. You ask if it works. Depends on the monk, he shrugs. And the rain. To the right is a cobbler's tent, where rows of handmade shoes and boots sit like well-behaved pets. Most are stitched leather with wooden soles, but there's one bizarre pair shaped like upturned gondolas. Pattens, the cobbler says. Keeps your real shoes out of the muck. You lift one. It weighs as much as a confused duck. You set it down carefully and decide you'd rather just walk around the mud. Your medieval ankles are delicate. You can't help but smile at the stall run by a group of needleworkers, women and a few men, quietly threading designs into long strips of cloth. One is recreating a fox hunt in stitches, but the fox appears to be winning. Another shows a peasant with a lute and suspiciously good teeth. Based on the steward's nephew, the embroiderer tells you. He plays loud, but he smells like roses. You make a mental note to avoid that nephew. Nearby, a laundress stands beside a stack of freshly bleached linens. She eyes your dusty sleeves and sighs the way only a professional can. Hard water stains, she says, pointing. And you've been near smoke. Walnut soot. You blink. How does she know that? You owe me a pie if I'm right, she adds, handing you a clean scrap to wipe your hands. You promise her one. Fully aware you'll probably owe her two. Tucked between 2 fashion stalls is a small tent where a woman sells ribbons, pins, and what might generously be called cosmetics. There's lip tint made from crushed berries, charcoal for the eyes, and something labeled Queen's Dew that smells like rosemary and horse. You sniff it once and sneeze so hard you nearly knock over a stand of hairpins. She pats your shoulder. It's an acquired fragrance. The atmosphere here is lighter than the Forge district, more social. There's music somewhere in the distance, a tune played on a reed flute that sounds almost modern in its melancholy. A group of women laugh as they compare hemlines, and a young man in borrowed hose does a spinning dance for spare coins. He nearly knocks over a rack of tunics and bows with exaggerated grace. No one seems to mind as you move on, You're struck by how tactile everything is here. Fabric is touched, smoothed, tugged. Threads are pulled. Seams are tested. You're reminded that clothing wasn't once bought anonymously from shelves but bartered for, argued over, fitted and fixed by real people who could probably recite your measurements from memory. And unlike modern wardrobes, these aren't meant to be replaced every season. They're patched, dyed again, turned inside out for double wear. A tunic might serve a lifetime or 2 or 3, passed down with repairs stitched in like gentle whispers from the past. You leave the textile quarter with a speck of blue woad on your sleeve, the faint smell of vinegar dye in your nose, and a warm appreciation for the skill required just to not walk around itchy and embarrassed. You find yourself veering toward the outer edge of the market now, following the scent of something herbal and strangely metallic, like crushed mint leaves over an old coin. This is where the healers gather. Not the cathedral's trained physicians, mind you, but the herbalists, midwives, bone setters, and other mysterious folk who keep the common people stitched together with salves and whispered prayers. The first stall you pass looks like an overgrown apothecary's garden exploded into a cart. Bundles of dried lavender dangle beside nettle, comfrey, and yarrow. A cheerful old woman with dirt under her fingernails waves you over. Need a charm for dreamless sleep? She asks. Or something for your back? You hesitate, then admit your back's fine, but your dreams have been overly interpretive lately. She nods gravely and hands you a pouch smelling like hay and river mist. Put this under your pillow. If it screams, throw it in a stream. You hope she's joking. Mostly .t the next booth. A man in a hat made entirely of feathers, goose, by the look of it, offers you a vial. For melancholy, he says, distilled from amber, sage, and 5 hours of church bells. You raise a brow. Do I drink it? He shakes his head. You hang it over your bed and try not to think about politics. Honestly, not the worst advice you've gotten today. You glance over at a table covered in bones. Not human, you hope, alongside jars labeled things like bad humors, lung salts, and cramp dust. One container simply says no. You decide not to ask. A barefoot midwife with arms like ship rigging gestures to a stool. She's rewrapping someone's wrist while giving instructions on how to steam nettle for congestion. Not too hot, or you'll just get steamed. She glances at you. Got a cough? You shake your head. Good. I charge extra for men who say they don't need help. Nearby, an older man in a patched robe leans over a basin of water with floating herbs. He murmurs Latin phrases that sound slightly mispronounced, and now and then tosses a pinch of dried rose petals in. A small crowd watches, fascinated. Is he a healer? You ask. Depends on who's asking, someone replies, and how much silver they've got. Historians still argue whether most medieval doctors really believed in the balance of humors, or just said so to justify the bleeding. You notice a line forming by a large tent with smoke curling lazily from its seams. Word is there's a barber surgeon inside. You join the queue out of curiosity, though not commitment. A boy emerges with a bandaged ear and a faint look of betrayal. You consider that a solid warning. Inside, the barber surgeon's tent smells of rosemary, sweat, and iron. He's sharpening a knife while casually discussing bloodletting with his apprentice. There are bowls, some empty, some definitely not, and an unsettlingly cheerful poster of the 4 veins to favor. You're shown a stool. No need to sit, you assure them. I just wanted to look. They nod. You back out slowly, like someone declining a dance with a beehive. Just outside, a traveling tooth puller with a showman's flair waves a pair of gleaming forceps. Guaranteed extraction, partial refund if you faint, he proclaims. A few townsfolk linger, curious. He gestures to a goat. This was my first patient. You blink. The goat bleats. No one seems to find this odd. Another vendor displays rows of bottles, rosewater, vinegar tincture, boiled plum syrup, ground pearl. He offers you a sip of something claiming to cure fever of the heart, trembling of the limbs, and fright caused by comets. You politely decline, mostly because your limbs feel fine and you haven't seen a comet since last Tuesday. The next stall makes you pause. It's filled with charms, iron rings, tiny bags, amulets carved from bone and wood. Some are etched with prayers, others with symbols that look older than writing itself. A young woman, eyes sharp and calm, explains. For evil eye, for fevers, for unwanted dreams and noisy ghosts. You ask if they work. Sometimes, she says, sometimes just knowing you've tried is enough. You buy a charm for quiet sleep anyway. Across from her, a man is offering leech therapy. He gestures to a bowl of glistening, wriggling creatures. Balancers of bile, eaters of heat, he declares. Good for swelling, headaches, bad tempers, and weddings. You take one look and decide your bile can remain unbalanced. A group of children gathers around a different stall where someone's demonstrating how to grind herbs with a mortar and pestle. The merchant lets them sniff crushed thyme and fennel, gives a brief talk on peppermint for nausea, and cheerfully informs them that everything tastes better with a little powdered willow bark. You mentally note that medieval parenting seems to involve a lot of pharmacology and mild sarcasm. One woman you meet sells incense sticks and smudging herbs, claiming they cleanse the air of spirits and bad moods. The smell is calming, lavender and resin, with a hint of campfire. She lights one and waves it around your shoulders. Just in case, she says. You breathe in deeply, exhale slowly, and feel a little lighter. Maybe it's just the scent, or maybe you were mildly haunted and didn't know it. And of course, because this is a medieval market, someone is peddling miracle relics. A scrap of a saint's sandal, water from a holy puddle, and a tooth that definitely did not come from a cow. People still crowd the table, eager for something to believe in. Historians still debate how many of these relics were knowingly forged versus lovingly faked. You realize that medicine here is a patchwork of knowledge, hope, tradition, and the occasional goose feather. It's messy, imperfect, and often deeply personal. But despite the lack of microscopes and mRNA, there's care here. A kind of handmade healing stitched together from whatever the land offers as you leave the healing quarter. A vendor presses a sprig of mint into your hand. For your breath, he says kindly, or your conscience, whichever smells worse. You tuck the mint into your belt and walk on, your steps lighter and your faith in medieval healthcare cautiously raised. Slightly, maybe. You pass into a quieter stretch of the marketplace now, where sounds are muffled beneath wool-draped booths and scents shift toward beeswax and fresh linen. This is the clothier's row, a corridor of woven textures and riotous dyes, where garments ripple in the breeze like flags of a dozen forgotten kingdoms. You reach out, fingers brushing a bolt of rough homespun wool. It's coarse, prickly, and the exact color of week-old porridge. Local sheep, the merchant offers. Not good for cuddling, but they don't mind the rain. He grins like he's proud of that. You believe him. The sheep in this region probably sleep standing up and glare at storms. Moving along, your eyes catch on fabric dyed a rich green, surprisingly bold for the era. Woad, explains a young woman, tugging the cloth taut for your inspection. Takes weeks to set the color. Smells like feet during the process, but the monks still buy it. You nod solemnly, as if you, too, have endured the sacrifices of fashion. She shows you a tunic with careful embroidery along the cuffs. Little bees and vines stitched in gold thread. It's far too nice for anyone doing actual labor, but you imagine a minor noble posing dramatically by a window in it, sighing about taxes. Historians still argue whether such embellishments were more for status, ceremony, or just bored hands trying to avoid eye contact at feasts. Nearby, a stall offers a kaleidoscope of headwear. There's a stack of linen coifs, 3 lumpy hoods with rabbit fur trim, and something that looks like a cake pan strapped to a veil. Fashionable in Bruges, the vendor insists. You raise an eyebrow. Well, 6 years ago. You nod. Time is a slippery eel, after all. You stop to watch a woman weaving at a narrow loom. Her hands move methodically, rhythmic as breath, drawing row upon row of thread into tight, deliberate order. I've been working this same pattern since Lent, she says. Not this Lent, the last one. You don't know whether to be impressed or concerned. You duck into a shaded alcove, where someone is selling second-hand garments. The clothes are cleanish, folded neatly, and most are missing at least one button. Gently used, the sign says, though you suspect the usage was not always gentle. Pair of breeches catches your eye. Good for a scribe, the seller claims, or someone who sits a lot. Anyway, across the way, a tailor is mid-argument with a merchant. That's not Flemish stitching, the tailor huffs. That's a peasant hem with ambition. You make a mental note to start using that phrase for your own wardrobe. A particularly loud hawker stops you in your tracks. He's shouting about a miracle belt that slims the waist, encourages good posture, and may prevent spontaneous dancing. You eye the belt suspiciously. It looks like goat leather and suffering. Still, several townsfolk are examining it with genuine interest. I in another corner. A spinner twirls her distaff lazily. You ask how long it takes to make enough thread for a tunic. Oh, about 2 weeks, she says. If you don't sleep or eat. Then she winks. Or marry someone rich. That works too. A child waves at you from behind a curtain of fluttering scarves dyed in madder red, onion gold, and that odd blue again. Want one for your head? She asks. Or your goat. You smile and pick the one that smells least like onions. Not all the cloth here is meant for clothes. You notice altar cloths embroidered with saints and animals. One even has what appears to be a hedgehog wearing a halo. He's the patron of persistent creatures, the embroiderer says with a wink. You're not sure if she's kidding. Neither is she. Another merchant has bolts of imported silk tucked carefully behind canvas panels. Smuggled in through Venice, he whispers. Or possibly Norwich. I get them confused. You gently stroke the shimmering weave. It's lighter than air and completely unsuitable for your budget. A particularly eager seller offers you a half-woven belt and a lecture on the difference between warp-weighted and horizontal looms. You nod encouragingly, but after the third mention of tension ratios, your mind drifts toward cheese. Wandering farther, you pass women trading flax seeds, dye stuff, and wool grease. One woman swears by using stale urine in the dyeing process. Sets the color, she insists, and frightens off moths. You believe both claims, unfortunately. Just ahead, a trio of traveling merchants are comparing embroidery samples. One displays a panel with mythical beasts stitched in painstaking detail. A lion fighting a snail, a fish with antlers, a duck in what looks like a bishop's mitre. Bestiary inspired, the merchant says. Very fashionable with clerics and lunatics. Again, possibly both. Historians still argue whether these strange creatures were allegorical teaching tools or just medieval doodles gone rogue. Either way, you wouldn't mind a pillowcase with that noble duck on it. You pause to watch someone mending an old cloak. The needle dips and rises, dips and rises. There's something soothing in the motion, like waves brushing the side of a small boat. She hums as she works, a low tune that sounds like wind through barley. For a moment, you forget the noise of the market, the mud on your boots, even the ache in your calves, and then someone shouts, 2 for 1 underpants, and the spell breaks. You glance over. Indeed, there's a barrel of linen underthings. Some even look new. The vendor waves one like a flag. Guaranteed to prevent chafing and unwanted marriage proposals, he declares. You decline, but appreciate the ambition. Eventually, the cloth stalls thin out. The last booth displays a patchwork of scraps. Sleeves, ribbons, sashes, and leftover dreams. Make do and mend, the woman behind the counter says. It's what we all do. You nod. She's not wrong. You leave the clothier's row warm from within, like you've been swaddled in wool and sarcasm. Your arms are empty, but your mind is full of bees on cuffs, saints with hedgehogs, and belts of dubious miracle. The path beneath your feet shifts again, from muddy packed earth to a layer of flattened straw and splinters. Clear signs that the next district deals in harder materials. You catch a waft of singed wood and hot iron before you see the source. The blacksmith's lane. Here, the soundscape changes. Gone are the gossiping fishwives and shrieking hawkers. Instead, you're greeted by the slow, deliberate clang of hammer on anvil, the bellows wheeze, and the occasional hiss of something plunged into a barrel of water. It's oddly soothing in its repetition, like the heartbeat of the market itself. You pause at the first forge. A soot-faced man, arms like hemhocks, is twisting a glowing rod of iron into something vaguely spiral-shaped. You squint. It's a hinge, he grunts without looking up, for a chest, or a particularly secure chicken coop. You nod, as if you've got several chests in need of such hinges. Next to him, an apprentice is shaping a horseshoe with intense focus, tongue sticking out like a toddler drawing a castle. Second one I've made today, he beams. Only 3 fell off last week. You manage a polite smile and back away slowly. You drift toward the edge of the smithing area, where the heat is less aggressive and the goods more diverse. There's a stall selling iron trivets, fire pokers, and the kind of hooks that could hang a cauldron or a sibling, depending on need. One item, though, stands out. A pair of delicate tongs shaped like bird claws. Made for candlewick trimming, the vendor says, or for reaching the last bit of eel in a jar. Historians still argue whether small household tools like these were standard in every cottage or just reserved for the fancier folk who had multiple eels to their name. Further along, you encounter a table of knives, paring, carving, eating. One has a handle made from a fox jawbone, complete with teeth. Keeps guests from stealing it. The seller explains, clearly proud. You mentally add that to the list of medieval passive-aggressive dining techniques. Beyond the blades, you find a weaponsmith whose table gleams with polished swords, maces, and some type of spear that's definitely overcompensating. All ceremonial, she assures you, noting your alarm. Mostly for parades and marital negotiations. You try to pick up a small dagger, but it's surprisingly heavy, evidence of the period's charming disregard for ergonomics. Back then, if you dropped your blade, it usually took a toe with it. The smith adds helpfully. You set it down very carefully. In one shaded corner, a man is engraving a pattern onto a shield. Not a coat of arms or battle scene, no, this one features a duck chasing a cat. My daughter's design, he says with a shrug. She insisted. You respect the duck's energy. You pass by another workshop, smaller than the rest, where an elderly woman is fitting iron strips onto wooden wheels. She squints up at you. Cartwrighting, she croaks, like blacksmithing, but with splinters. You nod solemnly, as if you too have suffered for will integrity. Across from her is a cooper hammering metal bands around a wooden barrel. Wine or pickled turnips? He answers before you even ask. Same barrel, different regrets. You notice a child dragging a lopsided helmet behind her like a metal snail shell. Papa says it was used at Agincourt, she chirps. Mama says it was used to scare off rats. Historians still argue whether most surviving armor was ever really used in combat or mostly just passed down as glorified kitchen decor. By now, the clang of the anvils has faded into background ambience like wind chimes powered by aggression. You pass one last forge, where a smith is tapping gentle filigree into a horseshoe. For a wedding, he says. Symbolic, mostly. She won't be riding anywhere. You raise an eyebrow. Shin splints. He clarifies that the next stall. Tools are laid out in neat rows. Chisels, hammers, nails so hand-forged they look like tiny medieval sculptures. One chisel is labeled ideal for cheese or heresy, which seems versatile, if a little ominous that an armorer nearby has hung a full mail shirt from a wooden beam. It sways slightly in the breeze, shimmering like an iron waterfall. You lean closer, mesmerized by the hundreds of tiny interlocking rings. Took a year, the armorer says, not without pride. A year and 4 wives. You decide not to ask whether the wives were helpers or casualties. You try on a helmet just for fun and immediately regret it. Your vision narrows, your neck complains, and you begin to appreciate just how much trust medieval warriors placed in peripheral hearing. You remove it as gracefully as one can remove a bucket from their head. Toward the edge of the row, a blacksmith is heating something in a small clay oven. It's not metal, though, it's glass. Experimenting, he mutters, trying to make those little beads the Venetians like. You nod. Blew one up last week, he adds. You step back. Somewhere nearby, someone drops a hammer. The thud echoes like a closing book. The forge is quiet. Even the smoke seems to pause. There's something oddly peaceful here, in the rhythm of industry, the sparks and sweat, the heat that wraps you like a sleepy cat. And just before you leave the blacksmith's lane, you see a tiny set of horseshoes laid out like jewelry, no bigger than your thumb. For ferrets, the sign says. or very optimistic merchants. You smile, your cheeks warmed not just by forge heat but by the absurdity of it all. Who needs sleep potions when you've got duck-engraved shields and ferret shoes? The air grows cooler as you stroll past the last forge, and the scent of charcoal gives way to something sweet and earthy, like crushed petals and wet bark. You follow your nose, or perhaps your curiosity, to a quiet, fragrant corner of the marketplace. This is where plants rule. Herbs, roots, flowers, and dried mosses are spread out on linen cloths, tied in bundles, or suspended in braids from the tops of tents. You've wandered into the apothecary's quarter. But don't expect clean glass bottles and tidy shelves. This isn't your modern pharmacy. Here, medicine is art, folklore, and occasionally guesswork. You see a woman carefully snipping sprigs of rue into a pouch while reciting a rhyme about banishing bad air and warding off melancholy spleens. Her stall is a mosaic of baskets: lavender, wormwood, fennel, dried rose petals, and a questionable stack labeled hedgehog moss. You're not sure if that's a plant or a tribute to some spiny woodland resident. To your left, a monk in a brown robe is grinding bark into powder using a mortar the size of a toddler's head. Willow, he explains without looking up, for fever, or for weddings, depending who you ask. He pours the powder into a parchment cone and seals it with wax. Best boiled in beer, he adds. Of course it is. You eye a display of tightly rolled scrolls. The merchant unrolls one for you. It's a hand-drawn chart of zodiac signs and associated bodily humors. Good for timing leechings, he says, utterly serious. Wouldn't want to cleanse the spleen during Mars. You absolutely would not. Historians still argue whether such medical astrology charts were actually consulted before surgeries or if they served more as elaborate conversation starters while people bled in bowls. You step aside to make room for an elderly woman buying ground horn powder for her husband's knees. Goat horn, she clarifies. Not unicorn. That's extra. Further down, a man sits cross-legged beside dozens of little clay pots. His beard is braided with thyme sprigs, which somehow inspires confidence. Poultices, he murmurs, tapping each one. This one draws out spirits, that one calms wind in the gut, and this one, he hesitates, then whispers, makes your dreams more polite. You're tempted, but you only have one coin left and a very impolite dream backlog. Point one small table near the center features nothing but dried frogs. Arranged like collectibles, each is tied with red string and labeled Plague Chasers. Hang them above the bed, the vendor offers, or toss one in the well for good luck. You make a polite noise of interest and edge away before your modern immune system rebels. You pause in front of a particularly beautiful arrangement of jars filled with infused oils. Saffron, juniper, rose. The vendor encourages you to sniff the lids. This one clears the mind, she says. That one clears a room. She chuckles softly. You wonder how often those two are confused, that there's a tent nearby that smells so strongly of vinegar and onions it makes your eyes water. You peek in. Inside, a quiet man is boiling concoctions in iron pots, muttering to himself while scribbling into a grease-stained ledger. Tinctures, he tells you, mostly for courage and foot rot. You pretend to look impressed. May also reverse accidental transformations, he adds with a shrug. You don't ask follow-up questions. At another booth, you find a tidy stack of painted wooden discs. Each has a symbol: a moon, a crow, a pair of crossed spoons. Fever charms, the seller says. Put one under the pillow and say something polite to it. When you ask what happens if you forget to be polite, she just smiles and slowly closes the lid on the box. You notice a patch of shaded earth where mushrooms are growing right through the cobblestones. A woman with fingernails like little claws is harvesting them with a bone knife. The red ones make you talk to trees, she mutters. The gray ones make trees talk back. You consider how much conversational bandwidth you have for vegetation and move on. The strangest thing you encounter is a stall that sells only smoke. Well, smoke in tiny woven pouches. The vendor burns a few at your feet. One smells like pine and beeswax, another like burnt cabbage and disappointment. Mood adjusters, he explains. This one's for joy, that one's for forgetting, and this one makes chickens lay sideways. You raise an eyebrow. Sideways eggs are a delicacy in Prussia, he insists. Historians still argue whether Prussia ever had sideways chickens or just very eccentric apothecaries. As you walk through the last stretch of this verdant district, you spot a pair of school-aged children trading dandelion heads for mint leaves with the solemnity of kings. A boy offers his grandmother's tooth in exchange for a thistle. No one blinks. Clearly this is standard procedure. You reach a narrow bridge over a little drainage stream, and from this quieter spot you can glance back at the chaos of herbs, jars, powders, and whispered cures. The smoke curls lazily upward, the herbs rustle in the breeze, and for a moment, it feels like the world is held together by beeswax and root bundles. You lean against the bridge's edge, watching the oily reflections ripple. There's something both reassuring and utterly unscientific about it all. The sense that healing is just a question of matching the right flower to the right headache, or speaking nicely to a spoon-shaped charm. Modern medicine may have more degrees, but it definitely has less rosemary. The stone bridge behind you creaks faintly under your steps, and once again your pace drifts back into that soft, aimless rhythm. Ahead, the marketplace begins to change character. The tightly packed herbal booths give way to open spaces, cluttered with tables, benches, and clusters of half-curious people. You've reached the place where performances unfold, not the grand theater, but the small-scale, mostly legal kind, puppeteers, balladeers, jugglers, and peddlers of both jokes and mild deception. You spot a traveling actor reciting a monologue about a fish who dreams of being king. His costume is a bit of netting, 2 walnut shells strapped to his cheeks, and something shiny tied to his hat. Half the crowd watches. The other half tries not to step in horse droppings. Still, he performs as if paid in applause, though you suspect a few coins might sweeten the deal. You're right. An elderly man balances a goose on his head while whistling through his nose. No one's quite sure if it's intentional. The goose seems smug either way. These impromptu stages are ringed by laughter and a kind of joyful uncertainty. Nothing's polished, but it's alive, raw, silly, and perfectly imperfect. Children sit cross-legged on the ground, eyes wide as a woman with painted eyebrows, and a tambourine spins a tale about a knight who fell in love with a shadow. According to her version, they now live in a cave and argue about whose turn it is to sweep. Just past the Shadow Knight affair, you come across a puppet theater, a makeshift box draped in red linen, with a hole where wooden characters bob up and down. Today's show seems to involve a turnip, a bishop, and a chicken with moral authority. No one explains the plot. Everyone laughs anyway. Historians still argue whether these puppet shows ever held deeper political satire, or were simply excuses to throw vegetables at something with googly eyes. You suspect both. There's a juggler nearby, not juggling fruit or knives, but spoons, all different sizes, spinning and clattering. You stop to watch as he catches one with his mouth and bows low. "For your breakfast and your amusement," he announces, then tosses a wooden ladle over his shoulder like a bouquet. A baker's apprentice catches it and yells, "Witchcraft!" to light applause. Not all the entertainment is theatrical. One stall has a man playing a hurdy-gurdy, a sort of medieval crank violin, producing what sounds like a lullaby being dragged through molasses. A cat sits beside him, possibly asleep, possibly offended. Next to him, 2 girls draw in ash on old slate boards, racing to see who can sketch the ugliest bishop. Judging by their giggles, it's a fierce competition. You peer over their shoulders. One of the bishops has goat ears and a shoe for a nose. It's quite good. You pass a booth where a storyteller leans in close to a ring of adults. No props, no instruments, just voice and timing. And then, he whispers. The cheese spoke. The crowd gasps, laughs, and someone drops a meat pie in astonishment. It's the quiet kind of performance that relies on shared breath and sideways glances. You linger for the ending. Apparently, the cheese demanded better wages and unionized the seller. Sensible Cheese. A corner stall with no signage. A man sells dreams. Not real ones, of course. Scraps of parchment with poetic nonsense and pictures of frogs in hats. Guaranteed to visit you during your next nap, he insists. Money back if you remain tragically conscious. You buy one for a few pebbles. It smells like ink and onions. Further along, A woman performs acrobatics on a plank balanced over a bucket. Each time she somersaults, she sings a line from a ballad about a lovesick baker and a cursed scone. Her final move involves landing in the bucket while harmonizing. The crowd gasps, then bursts into cheers. She emerges triumphantly, water streaming from her nose, and bows. "That was the tragic ending," she says, soaked but smiling. A boy walks past you carrying a basket of rats dressed as monks. "Blessings for a copper," he offers. You decide not to test divine rodent intervention today. You round the corner to a quieter patch, where a blind musician plucks a harp with broken strings. Each note stumbles but carries weight, like a memory trying to find its way home. No one claps, no one speaks, just a handful of people standing, heads bowed. As the sun paints everything gold, nearby, two men argue in iambic verse. You suspect it's rehearsed. "You stole my cheese, foul-hearted knave," one cries. The other responds, "'Twas not your cheese, but fate's to crave." They continue, their rhymes increasingly desperate. "My cow doth mourn, then wed her scorned." You want to stay, but their rhythm is contagious, and you worry you'll start speaking in couplets. 2.1 Last figure draws your attention. A wandering poet with a hat full of ink quills and mismatched shoes. He offers you a poem tailored to your mood. You say you feel pleasantly disoriented. He hands you a scrap that reads, "A turnip dreams of being wine, slash but finds itself alone at brine." You blink. He bows. Somehow, it fits. As you wander away from the performer's alley, you're left with the soft echoes of laughter, strange verses, and goat-eared bishops. You're not sure what any of it meant. And that's exactly the point. Your feet move again, not quickly, never quickly by now, but with a kind of quiet surrender to the rhythm of the day. The entertainment stalls drift behind, replaced by the smell of beeswax and something faintly herbal. You've entered the section of the market reserved for apothecaries, herbalists, and those strange, unregulated specialists who might call themselves healers or wise folk, depending on whether or not they're currently being fined. The scents here are oddly pleasant, even if the logic behind them sometimes isn't. One table is stacked with bundles of dried rosemary, thyme, and lavender, tied neatly with flax twine, the kind you could hang over a doorway or stuff in a boot if you wanted to ward off, well, whatever your neighbor's gossip might summon. Next to it, a more ambitious apothecary peddles mysterious powders stored in tiny cloth bags, guaranteed to settle the humors, he says, in the exact tone used by someone who once added chalk to oatmeal and called it spleen-thinning porridge. He waves a feather over the bag for emphasis. You don't ask why. You stop beside a young woman arranging colored glass vials on a wooden shelf. The sun filters through the bottles, painting rainbows on her hands. Some of them look suspiciously like olive oil mixed with flower petals. Others shimmer faintly, which probably means someone added fish scales or crushed beetles. Her labels are delightfully vague. For courage, against bad dreams, to ease noisy thoughts. You consider the noisy thoughts one, but it smells like boiled cabbage, so you pass a tea another booth. An old woman sells ointments for ailments both real and suspiciously poetic. There's one for aching knees, another for melancholy of the lungs, and a jar labeled for when the moon stares too long. You don't question it. Not tonight. A child walks past you with a pouch of dried leeches. He's beaming. "For Papa's knees," he explains proudly. You nod, as if that clears things up. Further down, a man leans over a mortar and pestle, grinding what might be sage, or might be yesterday's spinach. He's humming and wearing a robe 2 sizes too big, giving the impression that he woke up in the wrong century. "You look inflamed," he says cheerily, handing you a sample of something powdery and minty. "Just sniff it. It might calm your spleen, or double your dreams." You pretend to inhale. He nods sagely. "Ah yes, balanced." Historians still argue whether most of these remedies did anything beyond placebo, but even then, placebos have their place, especially if you're trying to sleep through someone else's goat alarm. You pause at a chalkboard that lists ailments in neat columns. Blood overheated, wind trapped, spirit misaligned, love too strong. There's a tincture listed for each. You wonder if they charge extra for heartbreak. Probably. Even in medieval markets, emotions weren't tax-exempt. Just to your left, a man with fingers stained green is selling salves made from moss. He describes them with theatrical flair. For boils, blemishes, and bad relationships, he offers you a sniff. It smells like riverbank and regret. A modest stall nearby is draped in woven mats and small linen bags stuffed with herbs. The woman in charge doesn't speak much but gestures with confidence. You recognize chamomile, mint, maybe even valerian root, all used for sleep, nerves, or what she simply calls the inner thumping. She hands you a bundle of dried petals. You pay with a smile, unsure if it's medicine or a fancy tea. She winks, possibly both. Then there's the spiritual vendor. Not quite a priest, not quite a fraud. His table holds bones, carved stones, and charms strung with feathers. For soul alignment, he whispers, and dreams without interruption. He hands you a little amulet etched with a sun and a bird. Place it under your pillow, just in case your BA decides to wander too far tonight. You thank him and tuck it into your sleeve. Amused and just a little comforted, a large barrel catches your eye. It's filled with vinegar-soaking onions, garlic, and various roots. The sign reads, "Plague tonic, not refundable." You decide against it. Next to it, a sleepy monk offers handwritten scrolls with prayers for healing, in exchange for donations to his monastery. The calligraphy is beautiful. The spelling is optional. Somewhere in the corner of the section, a gray-bearded man paces with a basket full of frogs. "Natural indicators of swamp fever," he declares. "If they croak backwards, you're cursed." One of the frogs leaps out and lands on a sleeping dog. Neither reacts. A girl about 9 years old peddles medicated honey, which is, in fact, just honey with 3 crushed mint leaves. "It works better if you hum while eating it," she insists. You buy a spoonful and try it. She grins. "See? Less grumpy already." You step back and survey the scene. It's a mix of nonsense, desperate hope, and the occasional legitimate remedy. But in a world where medicine was part science, part spell, and part inherited guesswork, this corner of the marketplace feels more like a communal hope station. A place where ailments met belief, and belief, surprisingly often, made people feel just a little better. The wind picks up slightly, tugging at your sleeves. The smells change. Less lavender, more wood smoke now, and the sky slips into evening hues. It's time to move on. The day's not over yet. You wander into what might be the least glamorous but most essential part of the medieval market, the toolmaker's row. This is where the clanging never stops and the sawdust always sticks to your shoes. Compared to the perfume of the apothecaries, this place smells like hot iron, pine resin, and ambition. A blacksmith is swinging his hammer in steady rhythm, shaping something unglamorous. Probably a horseshoe or hinge, but he's got the theatrical timing of a drummer at a tavern gig. Sparks jump every time metal kisses anvil, and he doesn't look up as you pass. He's in the zone. Around him, stalls are crammed with functional objects. Shovels, scythes, hatchets, awls, chisels, and an endless array of nails. Nails were hand-forged, remember, no hardware stores. You had to know a guy like this, or hope your neighbor didn't mind lending out his one extra. A boy not much taller than a bucket sells whetstones. "Sharpen your pride," he announces, which sounds like a proverb but might just be marketing. He offers to test your blade. You don't have one, but he tests an imaginary dagger anyway. "Could slice moonlight," he declares solemnly. You tip him just for effort. Next to him, a cart piled high with wood scraps is manned by a carpenter's apprentice who seems more interested in carving a fish into a plank than selling anything. He offers you a butter churn made from you. It's so polished you could see your reflection if you cared to look. Though let's be honest, you're not exactly camera ready after 10 sections of cobblestone walking. Tools weren't just practical items here, they were an extension of identity. A good set of tongs could define a smith. A curved needle could shape a weaver's legacy. Historians still argue whether certain medieval trades used specialized instruments that never made it into surviving inventories, or whether those tools simply got repurposed into something else after the owner died. Waste not, want not, even in death you pass a man selling rope. Just rope. Coils of it in all lengths and types. flaxen, hemp, even silk cord for the more delicate operations. He doesn't say much, just nods like a man who knows ropes don't need advertising. Ropes sell themselves. Across from him, someone's selling what looks like musical instruments, but closer inspection reveals they're farming tools with unfortunate design choices. One rake has carved griffin heads along the handle. Another hoe has a Latin inscription. O terra, audi vocem meme, O earth, hear my voice, possibly to remind the soil who's boss. You stop at a wheelwright stall. One whole cartwheel lies on display, propped up like a centerpiece. The spokes are waxed, its iron rim polished. You run your fingers along its edge, half hypnotized by the concentric circles. The wheelwright gives you a tiny lecture on how long it takes to craft a perfect circle without a lathe. You nod respectfully, the way you would if someone explained how to spin straw into wine. Someone behind you calls out prices for nails by the dozen. Not coins, eggs. In markets like these, trade was often barter. You'd be surprised what you could get for a basket of goose eggs. Someone once traded 3 for a copper pan and a kiss on the cheek. The cheek part wasn't required, but it did sweeten the deal. Just then, a woman opens up a cloth satchel and lays out her inventory. Clay pipes, horn spoons, and bone-handled knives. She also has a perfectly square wooden comb carved with miniature flowers. You try to imagine using it on medieval hair and feel a pang of sympathy for anyone with curls. A man offers you a hammer that he swears was once used to repair a cathedral. You doubt it, but the handle's smooth with use, and there's a faded mark you can't identify. It might be a guild stamp or just a burn from an inattentive apprentice. Farther down, a cooper demonstrates how to seal a barrel without leaks. It's oddly satisfying to watch. Wooden staves pressed together, then bound with heated iron hoops. He explains that a proper barrel could hold wine, water, grain, or even live eels if the mood struck. What if the mood doesn't strike? You ask. He grins. Then you've got an empty barrel and a quiet conscience. Someone hands you a flint striker and shows you how to spark it properly. The first few tries fail, but on the 4th flick, a flash arcs to life. You feel strangely powerful for one brief second. It's always the 4th try, she says. That's the rule. Tools here aren't flashy. They don't sparkle or sing or promise eternal youth. But they do what they're built for over and over. There's a quiet kind of dignity in that. A hammer that outlives its maker. A chisel passed down like a story that a potter spins a wheel slowly as you pass. His clay is slick, his hands confident. He's shaping a jug that may hold beer, water, or, more likely, be cracked and mended 5 times before finally giving up the ghost. His apprentice offers you a handful of shards from a broken batch. For luck, she says. You pocket one. Why not? You look around once more. Every item here had a purpose. No novelty desk gadgets, no ironic mugs. Just solid, weighty things with function first and form a distant second. The sun is tilting lower now, casting long shadows between stalls and across the cobbled lanes. You feel the weight of centuries in every nail head and knotted rope. And as you walk on, the thought settles softly in your chest. Maybe usefulness is its own kind of beauty. You veer into one of the quieter arms of the marketplace now, past the clangs and calls, away from the crowds angling for spices or goat cheese deals. Here, the pace slackens. You pass a man asleep on a sack of barley and a cat so comfortable in a hanging basket that you briefly wonder if it was born there. This alley is a touch off the main grid, reserved for items that sit somewhere between practical and spiritual. Not quite relics, not quite necessities. A liminal zone, if you will. You start to notice shrines, tiny ones, carved niches in the wall with a candle and a crude saint's figurine, or a splinter of wood in a box labeled Veracrux, a true cross fragment. At least 4 stalls have one. They can't all be right, but you admire the optimism. A woman kneels at a stall stringing together rosary beads made from dried berries. The smell is faintly sweet, and the beads are uneven, gnarled like knuckles. She tells you they're from a thorn bush that only grows near pilgrimage paths. You wonder if that's true, or just very effective branding to the next booth. An old man sells protective charms. One is a toad sewn into a pouch. Another is a bent nail tied to a twist of human hair. He insists both will keep demons away from your livestock. You decline the pouch gently, but can't help admiring how much conviction he packs into the sales pitch. "Works best if you believe it," he mutters, eyes twinkling. Historians still argue whether these items were sold sincerely or half in jest, whether medieval people truly believed a dried mole foot could ward off fire, or if it was simply tradition, like putting out cookies for Santa. Either way, it's clear these markets weren't just about consumption, they were about connection. To the divine, to the invisible, to the just in case. A younger girl sells wax figures meant for votive offerings. She holds up a foot, a hand, even a tiny set of lungs. "People leave them in churches," she explains, "to ask for healing." You're not sure what kind of illness calls for a wax spleen, but you applaud her attention to anatomical range. Further on, a soft chorus rises. A monk with a portable lectern is gently chanting in Latin. He's offering prayers for sale. Not just candles, actual intentions. You give him a name, made up, obviously, and he nods solemnly, intoning the syllables into his next verse. It's oddly comforting. Maybe the prayers aren't aimed at heaven so much as meant to echo softly inside the person paying for them. Just beyond, you find a stand cluttered with tiny bones, dried flowers, and ink-scrawled slips of parchment. Witchy things. The boy behind the table offers helpfully. You pick up a twig bundled in twine and dried orange peel. It smells like a pastry trying to hex you. He smiles. "That one's for good luck in childbirth." You nod, pocket it, and try not to imagine the alternative point one stall over. A woman is painting icons with impossibly tiny brushes. You lean in and see a halo that's no wider than your thumbnail, painted in real gold leaf. She dips her brush, pauses, and tells you she uses egg yolk and wine as binder. You try to act like you knew that already. Beneath the table are jars, muddy, unlabeled. She says they're pigments. Ground lapis, red ochre, powdered bone. "Blue is the most expensive," she whispers. "Costs more than meat." That tracks, especially since meat doesn't shimmer in candlelight. You pass a man selling feathers. Not quills, just feathers. He claims each one fell from a saint's pillow. You're skeptical, but you buy one anyway, for the sheer commitment to the bit. Then you spot something even more curious. A stack of tiny booklets, each no larger than a figure. Handwritten, tied with twine, scented faintly of rosemary. A woman explains their personal psalters, pocket-sized prayers. Some are just blank pages waiting for scribes. Others have tiny illustrations. Dragons in the margins, saints stomping demons like they're grapes in a barrel. She lets you hold one. The vellum is soft, pliable, nearly translucent. You imagine someone carrying it to war, pressing it to their lips before a battle they may or may not survive. You set it down gently and move on. A puppet booth looms nearby, its colors faded but cheerful. The puppeteer is animated, voicing both a wily fox and a bumbling bishop. The fox wins, as always. The small crowd laughs. It's theater, yes, but also moral lesson. Beware the clever, don't trust the rich, always look twice. A boy sells miracle pebbles from a spring blessed by St. Mildred. You smile, take one, and wonder if anyone ever complained when their miracle didn't arrive. Probably not. You wouldn't want to seem ungrateful in front of St. Mildred. You walk past a trio of women weaving straw into shapes. Stars, crosses, something vaguely chicken-shaped. They tell you these are hung in granaries to protect the harvest. And if nothing else, they keep mice mildly confused. A tall man offers a cup of holy water for 1 copper, with a free blessing. You're tempted, but instead you just watch the way he moves, slow, ritualistic, as if he's done this 1,000 times. Maybe he has, or maybe he just knows how to fill silence with reverence. You step away from the stall and realize you've wandered deep into a part of the market that doesn't feel transactional. These aren't just objects, they're hopes. Tiny physical expressions of fear, trust, and habit. No receipt needed. The wind stirs again. The sky's beginning to purple at the edges. The bells from a nearby church tower ring once, clear and low. You pause, listening, and then, with the faint smell of incense still in your nose and a wax spleen in your pocket, you step back toward the fading noise of the main market. You return now to the broader bustle of the marketplace, where the thrum of human activity once again surrounds you. Less sharp than before, like the volume's been dialed back just a notch as the day begins to wane. The shadows have grown long, slipping sideways across the cobblestones, and the scent of baked onions mingled with old wool and warm hay sits heavy in the cooling air. Ahead, you find a section dominated by those who make their living not through crafted goods or mystical tokens, but through service, the hustling class of medieval towns. Think of them as the freelancers of the 13th century, if you will. Their product? Themselves. A boy, no older than 10, rushes past with a tray of fish pies balanced on his head, yelling hot, hot, to anyone not looking. You nearly take a pastry to the chest. He doesn't stop. You hear someone yell, "That one's got eels," in what might be either delight or warning. Next to him, a man wearing a heavily patched cloak announces, "Teeth pulled clean, no pain," and then demonstrates his technique on a sheep's skull with theatrical flair. He brandishes a large iron tong with the menace of a sword swallower. A skeptical onlooker asks if he's certified. The man shrugs, "By experience." That seems to suffice. Historians still argue whether these self-proclaimed dentists were true professionals or glorified butchers. The truth likely sits somewhere in the middle between necessity and bold improvisation. After all, when your molar aches like a church bell in your skull, you don't wait for paperwork. Nearby, a young woman sets up a small stool and begins brushing knots out of a customer's hair using what looks suspiciously like a kitchen fork. She's chatting the entire time, recounting neighborhood gossip, throwing in a hymn verse now and then for moral balance. She's part stylist, part storyteller, part confessor. You pause as a dog, large, lazy, and vaguely resembling a mop, stretches across your path. A bootblack waves you over. He's seated on a low bench beside a barrel, smearing lard onto a cracked pair of boots. "Yours next?" he asks hopefully. You glance down at your medieval footwear, mostly dust at this point, and decline. He shrugs. "Suit yourself. Might not last another day." You suspect he says that to everyone. To the side, 3 musicians tune a lute, a recorder, and something that looks like a sideways violin. The music is rough at first, enough to make a cow flinch, but soon they find harmony. A jig kicks up. A nearby toddler starts spinning in place, arms out, until she falls over laughing. No one helps her up. She doesn't need it. Then there's the letter writer, a wizened man seated on a tall stool, quill at the ready. A long line trails from his desk. Peasants, merchants, a nun with a smirk. He's the local email, but with better posture. You hear someone dictating a message. "To my cousin. Tell him the goats are fine, but the wife is angry again." You wonder how many relationships he's quietly saved or sabotaged. A juggler distracts you next. Not with knives, too flashy, but with turnips. He's good, though. Very good. His face remains totally blank, which only makes it funnier. Someone tosses him an apple. He eats it mid-routine. The crowd erupts. You clap, then realize you're now holding a hat full of coins. He winks and walks off at a corner stall. A woman sells message birds. Pigeons she claims can return to any address in England, provided you whisper it 3 times. You suspect she's banking on people not understanding how pigeons work. Still, it's a good pitch. "They can also deliver breakups," she adds, "but they take longer." Next to her, a middle-aged man is tattooing someone's hand with a needle and what appears to be crushed blueberries. "It's a saint's symbol," he says, "or it's a cat. Hard to tell with the lighting." The customer seems fine either way. Across the lane, you hear a different kind of pitch. Theatrical, booming, unmistakably dramatic. A man in a makeshift cloak is performing a scene from a morality play. Something about envy or possibly turnip theft. Hard to say. The costumes are enthusiastic but confusing. One character wears a bucket for a helmet. Another has an onion tied to their waist. You get the gist. Sin is bad, and also mildly hilarious. You pause by a tall woman offering handwritten horoscopes. She asks your birthday. You invent one just to see what she says. She nods gravely. "That makes sense," she says. "You've been anxious lately." You wonder if that's true. Then remember you're standing in a fantasy version of a medieval marketplace, talking to someone with ink on her chin. Anxious doesn't begin to cover it. You pass a trio of town criers rehearsing tomorrow's news. They're arguing over pronunciation. "It's famine, not famine," one shouts. Another insists it's all the same once you're yelling in the square. Then, tucked in a quiet corner, you see what might be the oddest stall yet. A man with a stack of flat stones and a bucket of chalk. "I write regrets," he says. "One per stone. Toss them in the river later." His beard is too long, his eyes too clear. You ask him what kind of regrets people leave. He shrugs. "Mostly goats. Sometimes romance. Occasionally theology." You take a stone. "Write nothing. That feels right. There's a warmth in this section of the market. Equal parts absurd and sincere. These are the jobs no one trains for, but everyone needs. The invisible glue between peasants and nobility, between church and alehouse, between sorrow and satire." You begin walking again. Somewhere behind you, the musicians launch into a second tune. The letter writer yells for more ink. The juggler tosses a turnip skyward, and it disappears clean out of view. Evening has fully settled now, not with a grand flourish, but like a velvet curtain gently dropping over the day. Candles flicker to life behind windows and beneath awnings. Torches are being lit with the kind of lazy teamwork that only comes from practice. One vendor using another's flame, a third complaining his is always last. The marketplace doesn't close so much as it quiets, like a tavern breath held in mid-song. And this is when the pickpockets come out. You feel it before you see it. The shift in pace, that slightly too casual lean. A group of boys loitering near a cloth stall, one pretending to examine thread count while another brushes too close to a nobleman's coin purse. One glance, one flick of a sleeve, and poof, his silver's on a new adventure. Historians still argue whether these small-time thieves were seen as a menace or merely an expected inconvenience, like pigeons or mild foot fungus. In towns where poverty was a given and social mobility required literal horses, picking a pocket wasn't so much a rebellion as a survival tactic. A constable strolls by, truncheon in hand, pretending not to notice. You watch him trade a quick nod with one of the older boys. There's a system, clearly. Whether it's protection money, mutual avoidance, or just a long-standing truce is anyone's guess. But thievery isn't the only twilight industry here. Just beside the baker's stall, still warm from the day's fire, you spot a figure arranging small bottles on a velvet cloth. A toothless woman with more rings than fingers croaks. Cure for sadness, cure for boils, cure for sudden husband death. She winks. You're not entirely sure which part is the joke. She waves you over and offers you a small vial. "Lizard sweat and angel tears," she says. "Smells like pears." You take a cautious whiff. "It smells like vinegar and bravery." You decline. "And what's this?" A man standing absolutely still, face painted white, wearing a tabard that reads simply "The Wall." Every few minutes, he slowly turns his head. That's it. That's the act. 2 coins in his cup, already a short way off. A couple of girls laugh while selling lucky beetles. You don't ask what makes them lucky. Their giggles suggest even they aren't sure. But the beetles are alive and mildly iridescent, and some buyers seem genuinely charmed. Now comes the drifter time. People moving with no real direction, drifting between stalls and friends, from food to fiddlers, from warmth to wine. The deals are done, but the conversation stretches on. An old man tells an exaggerated tale of the time he wrestled a goose that was secretly a demon. His friends pretend it's the first time they've heard it. Everyone enjoys the lie. You pause at a fire pit where a few vendors have gathered, roasting scraps and swapping complaints. One woman fans the flames with a straw hat, muttering about "those cursed sausages" and how everything's more expensive since that comet. You nod like you understand. Comets do that. Overhead, the sky opens to stars, clear and cold. A man in an embroidered robe looks up and whispers, "Mars is close tonight." Whether he's an astronomer or a romantic is unclear. Possibly both. You pass a wagon now being packed up for the night. A couple of young apprentices stack leftover goods with all the enthusiasm of wet towels. Their master, a potter, judging by the clay under his nails, watches them like a hawk. Every drop jar earns a wince you can feel in your spine. "Careful," he hisses. That one was going to be a goose. A dog barks. Somewhere a lute strikes a sour note, and laughter follows. You stop to admire a display of lanterns made from dyed sheepskin, their colors glowing softly in the dark. A little girl dances between them, her arms overhead, chasing shadows. Then you hear the bell. Not the market bell. This one's heavier, slower, a tone that stretches between moments, like a cloth being torn in slow motion. It's the curfew bell, reminding the town that darkness still belongs to the powerful, and that you should either be in bed or locked behind a door soon. Several vendors begin moving faster, closing shutters, folding cloth, snuffing candles. The magician packs up his beetles. The lucky ones, you hope. The white-faced wall picks up his tabard and walks off like any other man. You pass a cart full of leftover vegetables being donated to the poor. A nun oversees the operation, brisk and humorless. She eyes you, as if suspecting you're about to steal a turnip. You give her your best innocent shrug and keep walking to the edge of the market. A group of children sits in a semicircle, listening to an old storyteller recount the tale of the night with no knees. You can't hear the whole thing, but it seems to involve a lot of hopping and absolutely no kneeling. The children are spellbound. You settle onto a low stone bench, letting the atmosphere wrap around you like a heavy wool blanket. There's still movement, still sound, but everything feels muffled now, as if the town has slipped into its nighttime slippers. From here, you can see the last stalls packing up. A cheesemonger arguing with a duck seller about who gets the cart space tomorrow. A minstrel rolling up his strings. A woman counting coins by candlelight with the grim joy of someone who didn't expect to have any coins to count. There's peace in this mess. A rhythm. Every hustle slows. Every whisper matters more. The stories told under stars seem deeper, even if they're about wrestling demonic geese. You breathe it in. The smoky, buttery, garlicky scent of a day well lived. Your feet ache, your pockets are empty, and you haven't eaten a vegetable that wasn't fried in 4 days. You feel good, tired in the way that makes your pillow feel like a cloud, your blanket a royal cloak, and just before you rise, you hear one last joke, drifting over from a pair of old women playing dice. Why'd the baker quit the guild? Too much kneading. The laugh is soft, but it's real. You rise slowly from the bench, knees stiff from the cool stone, and begin one last wander through the winding edges of the market. It's nearly empty now, just shadows and soft echoes. A murmured goodbye here, a creaking wheel there, the scuff of a wooden crate being dragged home. You move like a ghost among the remnants of the day. The air has a new chill to it, one that smells faintly of damp earth and fading smoke. Somewhere nearby, someone pours out the last of their stew onto the ground for stray dogs. One of the mutts, patchy, limping, clearly the veteran of many market nights, eyes you with curiosity but decides you don't smell like food. Fair as you pass by the stone well in the center of the square, you notice the carving again. A little cherub holding an empty jug. Someone has tied a ribbon around its neck. Whether it's for good luck or just a bored child's handiwork, you'll never know. You pause to peer into the well. It's just darkness, but it's the kind of darkness that feels deep, not threatening, like a secret nap no one ever wakes from. Off to your right, a building creaks. The guild hall, maybe, or the tax assessor's office. Either way, it's locked tight with not a flicker of candlelight showing. But above the door, the town's crest is carved into the beam. A wheel of cheese, 2 swords, and what appears to be a chicken wearing a crown. Historians still debate whether that chicken was symbolic of pride, or just a joke that went too far during the town charter drafting. And now, the final people trickle through your path. A young couple holding hands, laughing about something that probably involved spilled ale. A grumpy merchant muttering to himself about having to sell onions next to a fishmonger. A friar with no shoes and what seems to be 2 left sandals. You stroll past a quiet alley, where an enterprising cat has built a little throne out of discarded boxes. She watches you like a queen expecting tribute. You nod in respect. She blinks once, which you take as formal acknowledgement. Then, a familiar voice. It's the same vegetable vendor from earlier, the one with the suspicious parsnips. He's now sitting atop his cart, strumming a battered lute and humming what might once have been a popular ballad. His tune is a little wobbly, but the lyrics, half forgotten, half invented, tell the tale of a sailor who fell in love with a fish and gave up bread forever. You can't help but smile. Further down, a tavern door swings open, releasing a waft of roasted meat, stale beer, and laughter thick enough to touch. You don't go in, your night is drawing to a different sort of close, but it's comforting to know it's there, that somewhere, people are still singing and arguing over dice rolls. A cart trundles past, drawn by a donkey that looks approximately 800 years old and 3 naps short of consciousness. The driver hums softly, eyes half closed, guiding the cart with the ease of a man who's made this route so many times he could do it asleep. And maybe he is. You pass the shuttered tanner's shop now, its odor mercifully contained for the night, and duck under a hanging sign shaped like a boot. The cobblestone beneath your feet is uneven, slick from dew. You step carefully, your own gait mirroring that of the other townsfolk still awake. Slow, meandering, purposeful only in its aimlessness, there's one last flicker of life at the far end of the square. An old woman lighting a bundle of herbs at her stall's threshold. She fans the smoke around with a sprig of rosemary, muttering softly, cleansing the space maybe, or thanking the spirits of commerce, or trying to get rid of beetles. Either way, the smell is pleasant and strangely familiar, like bedtime in some far-off memory. The last official act of the market comes from a squat man with a bell. He rings it just once, then says nothing. He nods to you and you nod back. No words needed. The market is closed. You find yourself near the town wall now, not quite ready to leave but no longer fully in the realm of the living day. A horse nickers in its sleep nearby. An owl hoots once, then decides against a second try. Even the wind has slowed down, rustling only what absolutely must be rustled. You sit again, this time on a stone ledge that once marked the edge of a Roman road. Or so the sign says. It's in Latin and covered in moss, so it might actually say, "Do not sit here." But here you are, you lean back. The stars above are indifferent but comforting. The marketplace behind you is quiet but full of stories, laughter, arguments, questionable herring, and even more questionable cures. And tomorrow it'll all happen again. Slightly different, slightly the same. A new song, a new swindle, a new batch of lucky beetles, and now your own steps slow. Your thoughts drift like banners in the breeze. You've walked through a world that hummed with daily life. Silly, grimy, generous, and somehow still charming. Let it settle now. Let it fade gently, like the scent of spiced honey cakes in the air. Let the echo of market bells and clumsy fiddle tunes become the lullaby that sees you off to sleep. The world doesn't need anything from you right now. You've walked enough, you've listened enough. And so, we wind down. Let the world slow, now. Let your breath match the stillness of the square. That gentle hush after footsteps fade, after the stalls are folded and stories set aside that in your mind, you're still there. Walking the cobbles, soft moss between the stones, a breeze brushing your sleeve. The warmth of roasted chestnuts still lingers in the air. Laughter floats like steam from a distant cup of something sweet and forgotten. Even the torches flicker slower now, their light stretching and yawning, casting sleepy shadows across shuttered windows and resting carts. A dog sighs somewhere in the dark. The last echo of the curfew bell dissolves like honey in warm water. No more clinking coins. No more shouted deals. The beetles are tucked away. The goat is, well, hopefully tied up. The fish have stopped glaring. All that's left is breath, stillness, and you, drifting gently between thoughts like a lantern bobbing on quiet waves. Your feet no longer ache. Your back no longer itches from the wool tunic. You are weightless now. You are carried not on legs, but on story, on quiet. And now, let that final image hold you. A marketplace under stars, where even the wind seems to whisper goodnight. Close your eyes. The stalls are safe. The stories are waiting. And you, traveler, you've earned your rest.